Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the brake system on here. Once in a while these valves are either set a little bit too strong or weak, or they leak, meaning that they actually leak back. I'm really fussy on how I calibrate these things, but once in a while I do run into one where it doesn't hold pressure like it should. And this is what it actually is. It's a, basically what it is a one-way valve. It allows the fluid to go one way, but it restricts the flow back to a certain pressure. Normally between 6 and 10 pounds. The one that's in here is set at 8. I've just have one right now that is holding the brakes a little bit too tight, and so I'm actually going to send the fella one of these valves set to 6 pounds and one set to 8 pounds, and have him put the 6 pound in and see how that works. If there's not enough back pressure, what happens is you don't have enough lever to really make the brakes work properly, so you have to pump the brakes, which is what we don't want. If there's too much, the brakes will drag. So there's kind of a fine line between getting this set correctly, and most of my testing when I take it out for the final test drive is related to the brakes. The brake pads have to be seated in, otherwise they don't contact the disc properly. So there's kind of a wear-in process, and once in a while I run into these valves that have to be replaced and retuned and that kind of thing. So to replace one of these, you notice it's red and silver. The silver part always faces toward this, toward the brakes, not toward the lever. There's a triple brass joint here, so it actually points toward that. And the red part points up toward the lever. To get this out of here, you just hold this with a crescent wrench, a 7/16 wrench on each one of these blue things, blue nuts here. You can loosen those and spin them off by hand. Then you put the other one in and tighten them up by hand, and then snug them up with a wrench. And that's really all that's to replacing this. And I try to get them, like this one here is sitting where you can access it from the front very nicely. And I try to put those in a position where they're easy to maintain and replace if they need to be. Because this is probably the only part of this whole build that could require replacement. Everything else is basically set for a lifetime activity. So anyway, so this valve has been replaced. Let's look at how to bleed the brakes out. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is turn the handlebars all the way to the left, which gets the brake reservoir mostly level, which will really help so that you can fill it without it, getting it half full and it spilling over the edge already. And these screws should only be finger tight. They should never be torqued down real heavily. And this is a Harley Davidson Ultra Classic. Typical Harley Davidson, pretty much all of them are set up the same way. So once you get the brake reservoir opened up, and this one has no fluid in it because this is actually kind of a brand new setup here. So I use one of these things. I actually have a bigger one that I use, but I send this out to the customer if they need to replace. And it's just a little, it's called Bleed-O-Matic. It's just a little bottle, has a magnet on it. And I put a piece of rubber hose on the end there so it fits on the caliper nipple without flying off. And as you can see, it's not real big, but you don't have to bleed a lot through here because there's only about 6 foot of brake line. So one fill of the reservoir is usually enough to bleed all the air out. And we'll kind of move over to the front here so I can show you how we set up the calipers. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what side you start on. There's a little rubber cap on here. You want to pull that off. We'll set that aside. Take your little bottle, and it should just fit on that nipple there, like that. And then I take the bottle and I just stick it to the frame like that. And I'm going to get a 10mm wrench and some fluid. Now that valve you just replaced, because it's one way, it acts as a, you see, hear about these speed blitters, it actually acts the same way. It only lets the fluid go one way. So you don't need to put speed bleeders or any of that stuff on. What I do take these out and cover them with Teflon tape so they don't draw air back. But other than that, there's really nothing else I change. So this one is loose. I'm going to go ahead and fill the reservoir and slowly pump it. And at the same time, I'm going to watch to see if I get any bubbles. Okay, so I pumped it about 8 times. I'm going to fill it again. And I can see that fluid is going into the little bottle there, and I see no air going through the line, which means the line is clear. So what I'm going to do now is simply tighten up this side and move to the other side and bleed that one. And that one will take a lot less than this one. This one got like 99% of the air out. And when I take this off, I always hold this down low. So when I pull this off, it doesn't squirt fluid all over the place. And as you noticed, I covered the fuel tank and everything with a big blanket. And any painted surface I cover. You don't want to get brake fluid on any of the painted surfaces, or you're going to run into some trouble with possibly blistering and fading and color distortion. So we got the other side all set. And then the bottle's about half full. You want to make sure that that bottle never gets full. It's got a bleed hole at the top. We'll go ahead and move this. There's a bleed hole right at the top here. So if you overfill this thing, it's going to spray brake fluid all over everything. So you want to be very careful that you don't overdo this. If you're really concerned, what you want to do is watch that bottle when it gets about half full. Go ahead and empty it out. So now I'm going to do the other side. I shouldn't see any bubbles come out. And I really don't see anything. And the bottle is getting pretty full. So I'm going to go ahead and top off the reservoir and tighten up this side here. And we'll see if we have good solid brakes. And we do. The brakes are nice and firm, really firm. Yeah, this is perfect. So that was a success. The trick here on these valves, like I say, if you have a firm handle like that and the brakes don't drag, that is ideal. That's exactly where it should be. If the brakes drag, where you're getting a lot of brake dust, and when you stop, you can tell the thing just wants to stay put. That's kind of where we have to change the pressure setting on that valve. Other than that, these brakes require really no maintenance. You can bleed them out, you know, like you normally would every couple of years or whatever. But that's really all that's to it. And you know, the main precaution here is just make sure you don't spill brake fluid everywhere. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. So, okay, one last thing I want to mention here is when I put the cap on and I tighten these are Phillips screw, and almost all brake reservoirs are set up this way. I just use 2 fingers on the wrench or on the screwdriver like this, and just basically tighten it with my thumb and my index finger, and that's it. That's all you need to do. If you get in here and you crank on that thing, the next person or if you go to redo this, you're going to have to drill these out because you'll never get them out. You're going to strip the heads. I've actually got an impact Phillips screwdriver to sometimes knock those loose, and if that doesn't work, I drill them out. So be very careful on this. Don't tighten them too much, just snug. That's the real ticket with these. It's got a rubber gasket in there. If you over tighten it, you're going to probably pierce that gasket and end up with a leak. So over tightening can actually do the opposite what you're trying to prevent.